Hello, my friends. And if anyone thought that Putin would stop at 4 regions, the answer is no. Today we already received information about new ceasefire conditions. At a meeting with Trump in Alaska, according to agency sources, Putin is demanding the abandonment of Donbas, neutral status and withdrawal from NATO, and a ban on the deployment of Western troops on Ukrainian territory. In exchange, Moscow is allegedly ready to freeze the front in the Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions and to not claim part of the Kharkiv, Sumy, and Dnipropetrovsk regions. So it turns out that today the Russians are already claiming Dnipropetrovsk a region as well as Sumy and Kharkiv, which once again proves that Putin's appetites are growing. But Trump has finally realized that Putin is not going to stop the war and has started talking about long range strikes on Russian territory. Yet, again, there are no specifics, only accusations against Biden that he didn't give Ukraine the ability to strike Russia. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to win a war without attacking the aggressor's country. It's like in sports. The team has excellent defense, but they are not allowed to play offense. Chances of winning? None. The same with Ukraine and Russia. Corrupt and extremely incompetent Joe Biden didn't allow Ukraine to strike, only to defend itself. And what was the result? But this war would never have started if I had been president. Zero chance. Interesting times lie ahead. What interesting times are meant here is unclear, and what prevents Trump from doing it today is also unclear. And even the European Union Commissioner mocked Putin today. European Union Commissioner Kubilius mocked Putin, saying that the real master of the Kremlin might actually be Lavrov. Who is the real master in the Kremlin, Putin or Lavrov? How can you negotiate with Putin if, after a meeting between Putin and Trump, Lavrov publicly denies everything that Putin promised Trump at their bilateral meeting? Maybe Putin is not the real master of the Kremlin, said European Union Commissioner for Defense and Space Andrius Kubilius. Friends, be sure to write your opinion on this in the comments. And here is what Zelensky said about the Russian strike on an American company in Ukraine.
In Mukachevo, the Russians essentially burned down a company. By the way, it was an American company, a manufacturer of electrical equipment. And these were household appliances, nothing military. The Russians knew exactly what they were hitting. It was a missile strike. We believe it was a deliberate strike specifically against American property here in Ukraine, against American investments. A very telling strike, just like this entire massive attack. Right at the time when the world is expecting a clear answer from the Russians. An answer regarding negotiations to end the war. There are two formats in which real progress can be achieved. These are formats at the level of leaders, bilateral Ukraine and Russia and trilateral Ukraine, the United States, and Russia. We discussed this in Washington. Putin talked about this during a call with President Trump. Now, the signals coming from Russia are frankly indecent. They are trying to back out of the necessity of holding a meeting. They don't want to end this war. They continue massive attacks against Ukraine and very harsh assaults at the front. And on top of that, they launch missiles at an American company, as well as many of our other completely civilian targets. Moreover, very close to the borders of the European Union and NATO, a Russian attack drone entered Polish territory. There were also very unpleasant drone incidents in Lithuania. None of this is accidental, it is Russian arrogance. We expect our partners' reaction to be principled. This war must be ended. Russia must be pressured so the war comes to an end.
And now, even the head of American business has made a statement regarding this strike. Russia is humiliating us, said the head of American business in Ukraine, urging Trump to act. Andy Hunter, president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Ukraine, stated that the American company Flex suffered as a result of Russia's overnight attack. He asked Donald Trump to start acting. Russia is not only destroying Ukraine, it's undermining US leadership, values, and American business. Russia is not seeking peace, it's attacking American interests and values. We call on President Trump to stand with American business in Ukraine. Hunter added that as a result of the overnight missile strike, no Flex employees were killed, but around a dozen people were injured. Now, let's move on to the front. And we'll start right away with the Kostyantynivka direction. Here, the Russians continue to put maximum pressure from two sides in an attempt to break through to the outskirts of Kostyantynivka. They are storming Stupochki and Stepanivka. According to the general staff, assaults are ongoing in Sherbynivka and breakthroughs are happening near Poltavka. At the same time, the Russians admitted that reports about breaking through to the outskirts of Kostyantynivka were premature. They acknowledge there was some advance, but only a small one, and the gray zone here has shrunk. That's already good news, which means the fight continues. In the Dobropillia direction, the Russians continue storming Kucherev Yar, Volodymyrivka, Nikanorivka, pushing toward the town of Bilitske and assaulting Rodinske. The situation is extremely difficult, but Ukrainian forces report that strong units have been brought into this sector, so attempts to stabilize the front continues. In the Pokrovsk area, in addition to the assaults on the town of Rodinske, battles for which will decide the outcome of the fight for Pokrovsk, assaults continue near Novoekonomichne with breakthroughs toward the outskirts of Myrnograd. They are also storming Promень and Oleksiivka, the outskirts of Pokrovsk, Udachne, and advancing in the area of Kotline and Zvirove. Over the course of the day, around 50 assaults are carried out in this area, and the intensity is not decreasing. At the same time, there have been no changes in the last 24 hours, and the Ukrainian forces continue to repel all attacks. Meanwhile, inside Pokrovsk itself, the situation has in fact been stabilized. The Russians are breaking through into the city less, and even on geolocation maps, the central part of the city is now marked as a gray zone because only because Russians had previously broken through there. As of today, they are no longer present, and the situation has somewhat improved. In the Novopavlivka direction, Russian attempts to break through the fields toward the town are being reported again. Fighting is also ongoing in the Huliaipole area, with assaults on Dachne, Filia, Iskra, and the outskirts of Voskresenka. Since yesterday, Ukrainian authorities have reported that the armed forces managed to liberate the village of Tolstyi and shared video showing Ukrainian troops there with the Ukrainian flag. However, it's still unclear whether the armed forces have full control of the village, as it's still marked as a red zone on maps. So we are waiting for confirmation. In the Velyka Novosilka direction, the Russians are storming Komyshovacha, Novoyegorivka, Tymyrivka, and advancing toward Novoivanivka. Here, the Russians have had some successes for several days in a row, so activity has increased, and riding the wave of success, they are trying to advance further. However, there have been no new changes in the last 24 hours, and the fighting continues. In the Huliaipole direction, the Russians are not conducting any new attacks, and the situation remains stable for now. In the Zaporizhzhia direction, the Russians are advancing toward Stepnohirsk and are intensively shelling the entire frontline area. In the Kherson direction, the situation is essentially the same. The Russians are intensively shelling the right bank and preparing a bridgehead for a future landing. At the same time, attacks on the islands continue today, although the Ukrainian forces are so far managing to repel them and the front line remains unchanged. Now moving to the Siversk direction, activity is quite high. The Russians are pushing toward Yampil and Dronivka, attempting to advance through Grigorivka and Vyimka, storming Pereizhne and Fedorivka. However, in the past 24 hours, no significant changes have been recorded, and the Ukrainian forces are so far successfully repelling all attacks. In the Lyman direction, the Russians are storming Dvorichna, breaking through near Yampolivka, Kolodezi, Shandrigolove, Karpivka, Ridkodub, and Sultan Olgivka. In recent days, the Russians have made significant advances here, but so far today there have been no new gains and the front line remains unchanged. In the Borova direction, the Russians are not conducting any new assaults, and the situation hasn't changed over the past 24 hours. In the Kupiansk direction, the Russians are assaulting the outskirts of the city and Holubivka. There have been no changes in the past 24 hours, but the Russians continue daily attacks and are trying to achieve gains. Therefore, the situation here is difficult. In the Dvorichna direction, the Russians are pushing toward Petroivanivka, but they haven't had any success, and the Ukrainian forces are managing to repel all attacks. In the Velykyi Burluk direction, the Russians are pushing toward the village of Khatne and storming Ambarne, but so far they haven't been able to advance further, and the Ukrainian forces are successfully holding the defense. In the Kharkiv direction, the Russians are not conducting any new assaults so far. In Vovchansk, fighting continues, and attacks have started on the village of Okhrimivka. It's clear that the Russians are trying to push through defenses anywhere and look for places to advance, but so far the Ukrainian forces are holding the line and not allowing them to move forward. In the Sumy direction, the Russians are pushing near Oleksiivka, but activity has apparently decreased and the situation has stabilized. There have been no changes along the front line for a long time. However, in the area of the village of Tytkene, attacks continue and the Russians are again trying to break through the border. They have had no success and the front line remains unchanged here as well. And that's all from me. So, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on all the latest news. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye bye.